Justice for my crown is justice for us all. Which side are you on, friend? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, friend? Which side are you on? Justice for my crown is justice for us all.
It is perhaps the single most misunderstood and often badly explained piece of the Michael Brown shooting that is discussed every single day. Those seeking justice and often not knowing what the American justice system does and how it works, and then leading to plenty of misconceptions and errors in commentary. So let's set the record straight. Let's welcome back from the law offices of O'Brien and Ryan LLP in Philadelphia, our MidPoint legal eagle, Heather Hansen joins us. Heather, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Always a pleasure to be here, Ed.
Let's get right to it here. We're now hearing the Washington Post was the first to report it. Now, several of the other networks are starting to weigh in, saying that the St. Louis County prosecutor will make an announcement in the Mike Brown case today. And again, we're all just sitting here and we're watching from afar. But seeing as you know the legal system, you know what happens here, they're getting ready. What do you imagine will be going on here at this point? Because I would guess they've also got to be taking steps to protect the grand jurors, because nobody's bringing that up. They know what's going on in that town, and they're the ones, negatively or positively, whatever, they're going to be held accountable.
And that is the biggest concern here, because their protection should be of utmost importance. Normally, a grand jury is completely secret. You don't know what the makeup is. You don't know when and where they're meeting. Here, there's been questionable leaks, perhaps leaks, and the fact that there's going to be this major announcement, now we need to ensure that these people are protected. So there will be steps taken to ensure that that's the case. It's going to be difficult if the prosecutor's request for all of the proceedings of the grand jury become public to keep it as secret as it should be. So there's a real balancing test that's going to have to take place once this decision is announced.
Well, let's look at that, because the prosecutor has said that if there is no indictment, he will ask the judge to release the transcripts of the grand jury proceedings. Now, I'm going to try and look at this on both sides. Yes, it will be good because it'll let people know exactly what went behind the thinking and why they did it. And no, it'll be bad because it'll let people know exactly what was behind the thinking and why they did it. There's no win here, and there's going to be a bad guy no matter what you do.
In general, Ed, I'm always of the mind that there should be cameras in the courtrooms, there should be complete transparency so that everyone can make their decisions. Here, I do have some concern because so many people have already come to their conclusions, and if the evidence doesn't support what they want it to, they just ignore that evidence. I do think it's important that people have access, if there is not an indictment, access to this information. However, what the judge has to consider is part of the reason people agree to testify before grand juries is because they are reassured that this is going to be secret. No one will ever know that you testified. If that is then to be thrown out the window, we have to worry not just about the safety of the grand jurors, but also the safety of potential witnesses who may have said things that the general public might not like.
What about then the grand jury? Because I'd heard this in several different discourses over the weekend. I also heard this from a couple of people on the street in Ferguson who said, 6 eyewitnesses are there. This is the easiest case in the world to figure out. This does not need to go to a grand jury, and several of the usual rabble-rousers are the ones who are always claiming he needed to go right to trial and take it right there. Please, Heather, give us the legal reason why in the American judicial system this case went to a grand jury and did not immediately put Darren Wilson right in jail and then charge him and start the trial proceedings.
The majority of these cases, Ed, do go to grand jury. It is a process that was started with our Constitution, with the idea being rather than one single prosecutor making decisions as to whether or not a person is going to be charged with a crime, that people, members of that person's community, would make that decision. This is not unusual. This is not unfair. This is not in any way biased. This is something that has been going on since the beginning of our country. And so to now say that this is an unfair process is just a complete lie, and it's leading people to conclusions that are leading them to get more upset and be more likely to somehow want to express themselves in ways that may cause riots. So we need to sort of double back here and explain to people that this is typical. Secrecy is typical. The fact that they have met individually for 1 day a week, so it's been a long process, is typical. And the atypical thing would be if any of that information is released once a decision is made.
Why would it then also be typical for an officer to not be arrested? Here comes one of those things people are saying. There was a shooting, someone was killed, and in most cases, and you hear this from many people, that if it was a black man who did it, he would be immediately put in jail. Why then was Wilson not arrested and then placed in jail? And I already know the answer, but I want you as the legal expert to tell us why.
Well, there's actually two answers to that. One is that if a person is not indicted, they are not always put into jail. It often depends on the bail system, but the more important answer to that is that because he is a police officer, he has an extra presumption that he can act in self-defense and in defense of others. We saw this with the George Zimmerman case, that he was not immediately arrested because he was acting in self-defense. That was the conclusion at that time. Here, if there is a belief that this officer was acting in defense of himself, in defense of others, then that in and of itself is enough to lend that presumption to him so that he's not immediately arrested.
With regard then, a couple of minutes we have left to what is happening in Ferguson now. The National Guard is there. The police are on alert right now. Sitting there as a law enforcement, but sitting there rather as a legal expert here. As you look at this right now, there are those, for instance, Jesse Jackson was quoted this week as saying, they're not looking to bring this community up. They're basically looking to condemn this community, and that's what they're doing. But don't you have to, whether it's black, white, blue, green, whatever, you've got to take these precautions because we have seen that there is a preponderance for violence here, whether it's people in the community or out of the community, it will still happen there, and you've got to protect the citizenry.
That's right. We have to protect everyone. These precautions are necessary. We saw that there were riots and there did lead to some violence before, back in August when this happened. And better to be safe than sorry. This is not to attack the protesters. This is something, it's part, again, a part of our system that we have in place to protect store owners, to protect the people of the community, to ensure that any protests are held legally and lawfully, and that everyone involved, whether it be the police officers or the protesters, are protected and acting within the confines of the law.
We are keeping our fingers crossed, and I will tell you this, that every legal professional that I've spoken to says it's being done exactly as it should be done, and these are the people that know, and you certainly are the person who know, and I'll say it again, I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on TV, and that's why I come to you to get the real answers all the time. Heather Hansen, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Have yourself a wonderful, to you and your family, a wonderful holiday weekend. We'll see you next week.
You too, Ed. Take care.
Okay, short time out and we return with the Monday Madness on Wall Street, featuring the latest on the electric car that continues seeking ways to separate your money from your bank account. And we are continuing to watch what's coming out of Ferguson. We are told that the grand jury has reached a decision. Stay with us on MidPoint.